Yo. And go, Jason.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to begin by saying that this is the first International Overdose Awareness Day forum that we have held online. So I'll apologise in advance for any technical difficulty, but it's not going to stop for the message that we're about to bring to you, the message that should be heard, and that is compassion, not judgment. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land in which we're meeting today, the very people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects, my respects, to the elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal elders from any other communities. We welcome you and pay our respects to you also. My name is Jason Vandy, and on the 28th of August 2015, our family lost my beautiful nephew. Over the duration of forever. It is the judgment and the stigma associated with addiction and overdose, which brings us here today, because it is about compassion and not judgment. For there is no bias with what we have experienced, perhaps been touched by, but certainly know of as a result of addiction. Lineup of people to talk about this issue, to share some stories and to bring together the necessary requirements, I guess, the need for us to be able to talk together, communicate and share our experiences as we live this journey together and as we help others overcome theirs. So I'd firstly like to I'd also like to, before I introduce the first keynote speaker, I'd also like to share that if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, some of them are coming through on live feeds, some of them are in fact pre-recorded. If you have any questions, we may not be able to respond with accurate information right here and now, but certainly know that we will note your questions and be able to respond in a timely manner with the details and things that you may need in relation to that. So, without any further ado, I will introduce our first keynote speaker. Our first keynote speaker is Professor Margaret Hamilton. Professor Hamilton has over 50 years' experience in the alcohol and drug field, including clinical work, education, research, and policy development. He holds an honorary position as Professor of Public Health in the School of Population and Global Health. Professor Hamilton has 50 years' experience in the alcohol and other drug field, including clinical work, education, research and policy development. And she also holds an honorary position as a Professor of Public Health in the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne. Her work has included founding director of Turning Point Alcohol and Drug Centre. She's been chairperson of the Victorian Multiple and Complex Needs Panel, and she served as an executive member of the Australian National Council on Drugs for over 12 years. She was also on the Prime Minister's Council on Homelessness for 3 years, President of Cancer Council in Victoria, and a member of the Board of Vic Health and Chair of the Advisory Committee for the Centre of Alcohol Policy Studies at La Trobe University, as well as many other roles in the drug and alcohol organisations and national and international bodies. Professor Margaret Hamilton has, as I've just read, all the accolades, but certainly the research, understanding and clinical expertise to talk on this topic. So without further ado, we're going to now listen to the keynote address from Professor Margaret Hamilton.
So, hello everyone. My name's Margaret Hamilton, and I have the privilege of speaking with you on Overdose Awareness Day, a very important day for remembering and for coming together and sharing. This is not about policy or politics, it's actually about people. It's about people who are living, about people who have lived and who are remembered, and people who may have experienced an overdose, but we don't know about that, or we don't know whether it's been a lethal overdose or whether it's been an overdose among many that that person has already experienced. Not all overdoses necessarily end in death, which is why we have to work so hard to identify people with that experience and provide support and assistance to them to reduce the likelihood that that will end in death. But for some, it has already meant that someone has died. And usually that starts with the realization way earlier that someone close to us, someone in the family, is actually using drugs in a manner that puts them at risk of all sorts of harm, including the risk of death. That realization can sometimes provoke a sense of, what have I done? What could I have done? What should I be doing? Why didn't I pick up on the early signs? What's the problem? And a lot of self-doubt, a lot of self-blame, a lot of recrimination, a lot of sadness, and a lot of grief, guilt, grief, loneliness. And I think for many, that sense of the loved one being a child, if you're a parent, if it's a child who is mourning the death of someone, a brother, a sister, a cousin, or a friend, or maybe even an acquaintance who at some point realised they could have done something to intervene and prevent that death. It's very tough being that kind of family member that is left behind to think about the person who's died and what we could have done. Could I have been a better parent? Should I have done more? Should I have tried whatever? ... There will always be things that we think of that we perhaps could have, should have, maybe tried. Maybe the person was not ready to receive that help. Maybe the person was not in a position to receive the help. Or maybe even harder, if they asked for help, but I was not in a position to give the kind of help they were asking for at that time. There are many, many reasons why we wonder if somehow we were responsible. We carry a load, not just of the sadness of grief, but also of the guilt of grief. I think that guilt is one of the hardest things to rid oneself of. And associated with that for many who have had someone in the family die of an overdose of drugs, there's also a layer of shame. And getting to the other side of that shame and that guilt requires acceptance. Acceptance of the person who was using drugs, acceptance of them and their manner of using drugs, the choices they made, or the circumstances that they found themselves in or put themselves in that has contributed to an overdose experience. That kind of acceptance can come best through greater knowledge, greater understanding, but especially through sharing the experience, being able to talk about that son, that daughter, mother or father, sibling, friend, being able to talk about them and remember positive things as well as sometimes negative or frustrating or angry or all kinds of experiences and thoughts. The endless efforts that families have gone to try to assist their drug-using member. The difficulty of continuing to provide support, of different kinds of advice, tough love advice, suggesting that you reject the child while they're using. Not helpful probably, because no parent or sibling can ultimately reject a family member. How to care for someone who doesn't seem to respond to our caring can be very hard. But getting information, sharing the experience with others, the loss and the pain, often the grief that many have already been through layers of along the way. Death sometimes is merely an added load of grief on top of many little griefs, as bits of your family member have become less accessible to you over time. And the sense that you really will struggle sometimes, I think, to cope. I've always found the mantra of many of the self-help or mutual aid groups most helpful. The one day at a time. You don't have to get through tomorrow or next week, next month or next year, or the annual anniversary. You just have to get through today. And sharing with others can be a good way of doing that. Over time, some healing occurs, and it becomes important to remember the good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly. Time becomes important too, and I think for many who've experienced a family member overdosing and dying as a result of drug use, the involvement of the coroner becomes tedious and frustrating. And I thank everyone who has contributed to sharing the waiting involved sometimes, because sometimes it's been the coroner's cumulative experience of a number of overdose deaths that has contributed to the powerful intervention of the coroner here in Victoria that facilitated policy shift and the opportunity for us to have a medically supervised injecting room. So all who have had family members die of an overdose death have helped, because those coroner's findings coming together has meant that others' lives have been saved. I don't know and can't know what it is like to have a child die of an overdose death or another family member. I've been fortunate. I have had the experience of family members using alcohol and a range of other drugs in a way that I've regretted. But touch wood, none of them have had the tragic circumstance of dying of an overdose death. But I have had the experience of a child dying. My son David died when he was 7.5 months old. Very young, a very different experience. But I share with you that it took me a very long time to accept that there was nothing more that I could have done that could have saved his life. And that allowed me to go back to remember the positive experiences with him. For me to have other children and to now have not only 3 stepchildren, 2 additional children who are still alive, 7 grandchildren who are step-grandchildren, and most recently, just 6 weeks ago, my own granddaughter, Nellie, born to my youngest daughter. So anniversaries come and they go. But Overdose Awareness Day is a very important time for families who are needing the support of others, wanting to support others, to understand others, to come together. So I wish you well on Monday and hope that all goes well for you. Just on Monday, one day at a time, sometimes helps. Thank you. Thank you, Yarra Drug and Health Forum. Thanks for the opportunity to join you on this important occasion.
Overdose Awareness Day, as Margaret said, one day at a time. We're here to connect, to talk, to grieve together, and to live our next steps for the best of our children and their children. I'm now going to introduce Mick Clear, Mick Clear, father of Leah Clear, who's going to share with us his story. I will mute myself and hand over to Mick now. Thank you very much, Mick. Sorry, Mick, you're just on mute there, mate. If you could unmute.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry, I'll start.
Loud and clear now, mate. Yeah, loud and clear.
My name is Mick Clear. I'm a father of 4 children, grandfather of 3 children. I come from a small town and live in a small town of St Andrews, north of Melbourne. I'll start my story at the end and go back to the start. This will hopefully give you a better perspective and understanding of the point of my speech tonight. In May of last year, my daughter died of an overdose, and the way I found out was 2 policemen walking up the driveway late at night when I was collecting firewood. And of course, my life has changed forever since that day. It was the end of a long journey, a long journey, full of sadness, torment, and heartbreak and struggle, but also a journey of triumph, success, and enlightenment. My daughter's life was a beautiful one amidst the chaos and struggle. There were many lessons to be learned from people like my daughter Leah, who have been there, recovered, and we need to learn from these valuable lessons so we can help future generations combat this hideous problem. Leah was born into a loving family environment. Indeed, she was loved by all the moment she graced this earth, a cheeky, always smiling little girl with an infectious giggle and cutest smile. She grew up to be a live wire personality, intelligent, witty, and naturally inquisitive. We always thought, like most parents do, she was destined to be something special. Her literacy skills at the very early age were amazing, and journalism seemed to be her destiny. When Leah was 14, something changed. The light that once shone from her bright blue eyes had dimmed. The radiance that had beamed from that beautiful smile had gone, and the playful child had disappeared. We then learned Leah was experimenting with drugs, but at the time we were unaware of the type of drugs or the regularity of the use. This is the critical moment for parents. We are talking about a child, our baby, what to do, what the panic, the unsurety. Well, what do we do? Well, of course, we kick into the parenting mode. Like, this is going to stop right now, right? So the good, loving parent takes over and in control, right? Just sit down and, give that young girl a good lecture and a couple of weeks of isolation, and we'll sort this thing out, right? We were so wrong. And it's only after these years that I now understand how wrong we were. You see, by the time we parents find out about a drug issue, the horse has already bolted. Your child, your baby has basically left the building, but you still kick into what you know. You do the good parenting thing. You react without knowing what the hell you are doing because you know nothing about addiction. So we sought out help from local counselling services. One thing I remember so well was the young counsellor, fresh out of uni, I thought to myself, told us to expect the long road ahead. I was stunned and not wanting to believe what she was saying. Yes, I admit I was dismissive and doubted what she was saying. We were talking about a 14-year-old here. Just a bit of tough love would have fixed it all right. Wrong again. And that young counsellor was so spot on. Leah spent the next 10 years in and out of rehab, in and out of our lives, and all this time I expected the police to come knocking on the door with bad news. It was the darkest time for Leah and for us, her family. We were powerless to save her from herself. We lived in hope alone. It seemed as if she disowned her family. It seemed that she didn't want to know or have anything to do with us, almost like she hated us. Leah eventually rose from the depths of her dark world, and with some determination, the same determination and love of life that she had as a child, she came clean and blossomed. Nothing was going to get in her way. She was shining, she was back. Immeasurable. To see her sparkle return was joyous as anything I've ever experienced. Indeed, it still gives me so much comfort through my grief. Leah went back to uni and studied psychology, passed with distinction, and became a yoga instructor. She went to work in rehab, helping others. And this she did with so much skill, love, and compassion. I've been told by so many people that she literally saved lives. To the greater community. But the addiction is always lurking in the background. And one day Leah lost the battle that she had fought so bravely. To the greater community, my daughter's passing is just a statistic, a commonly held view of those who have never been exposed to drug addiction is that of disdain. We see on news reports adults lying in alleyways, sleeping in parks, destitute and alone. Society sees someone who has just lost their way in life, made terrible mistakes, weak, pathetic, useless individuals. But this is the end of the story we are seeing. Make no mistake, this starts with our children. If hundreds of children were dying in schoolyards across the country, there would be outcry. We as a society would not accept this and would throw everything we could at it. Yet because the tragedy outcome of what starts in childhood is not really realised until adulthood, we have a less sympathetic attitude. Yet the majority of addicts were hooked when they were just kids. Who of us can look back when we were 14 years of age and say we made decisions that carefully considered our future when making these decisions? This is happening today. 14-year-olds will be introduced to drugs today. There will be a whole new group of parents going through the same crash course we went through 20 years ago. We need the urgency go-to for parents. And I'm not overstating it when I say emergency, because by the time parents discover there is a drug issue, they are already behind the 8 ball. There is no time to learn. That statistic is somebody's little child. That person found lying in the back alleyway is someone's child. We as a society need to change the narrative surrounding addiction and overdose. Last year, I lost my child, my little girl. Not someone who lost their way and couldn't cope with life. I carry no shame about my daughter. I feel love, admiration, and of course, deep sorrow. What we need is compassion, support, education, not judgment. We as a society cannot continue to accept this. We as a society have to change the way we view addiction. We need to be ready for those first-time parents, and we need to be ready to respond with absolute urgency when they need us. It is so critical that parents have this service, as they do if a child is injured, falls ill. It is no different. Finally, my speech is very much a legacy to my daughter's work and reflects many things she taught me. I took inspiration and strength from her to be able to deliver this tonight. To parents who have also lost their children to addiction, I want to share with you something very special, because I was privileged to have my daughter came out of addiction. She recovered and she got to reflect to me and tell me things that had happened in that time, which is just wonderful. Leah explained her distance of herself from her family when she was an addict. She said, "Dad, I never stopped loving you. I was just protecting you from what I hated about myself. I didn't want you to hurt more than you were already. I always knew you were there for me, and I always felt your love. Your love kept me going. So thank you for listening tonight. All the best, everyone.
Thank you, Mick. Mate, if I was right there right now, I'd get these arms around you, and but thank you for being brave. No, thank you for delivering the message that you know you had to deliver. We thank Leah for instilling the inspiration and strength for you to deliver that message right now. And no words from anybody right now will take away what you have experienced, but as a collective, all of us together, our arms are around you, and your message is loud and clear. The narrative has to change, and that has resonated with me and should resonate with everybody in that narrative changing. Let's drop the stigma. Let's act. It's a bloody emergency, and it needs to happen. Thank you, Mick. I'm now going to we'll now move on. The next group of people we're going to hear from are the politicians. They're going to share with us, I guess, a collective understanding, their view. We have 4 politicians now. The Honourable Martin Foley, he's Minister of Mental Health. We'll hear from him in a pre-recorded speech. And we'll also hear from the Honourable Fiona Patton, the Leader of the Reason Party, a member of the Victorian Legislative Council in Northern Metropolitan Region. And we'll also hear from the Honourable Dr. Tim Reid. He is a Greens Party member of the Victorian Legislative Assembly for Brunswick. So we'll start rolling on those and listening now to our politicians. Thank you, Nick.
Hello everyone. Thank you to the Yarra Drug and Health Forum for organising this event, to our guest speakers, and to everyone digitally joining us to commemorate International Overdose Awareness Day, now in its 20th year. I would like to acknowledge the First Peoples and traditional owners of the place now known as Melbourne, where I am today, the Wurundjeri people and the Bunurong of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to all elders from other communities who may be joining us today. Today, we acknowledge and remember every person who has lost their life or met with permanent injury due to drug overdose. We continue to lose too many Victorians to an early, unnecessary death due to drug overdose. We see trauma and its consequences play out in the lives of many Victorians from all walks of life and all postcodes. Overdoses leave marks of terrible tragedy for the individual lost, for the families and friends affected, and for the wider community. And for those left behind, the stigma of drug-related death can add needless pain for people who are already struggling with their loss. Today is also a chance to reaffirm that deaths due to overdose are preventable. I am proud that in recent years the Victorian Government has taken big steps to reduce the toll of overdose on our community. Our supervised injecting room trial in North Richmond has saved at least 21 lives and has safely managed 3,200 overdoses since it opened in June 2018. That's why we've extended this trial and why we're opening up a second facility in the Melbourne CBD. The consultation process, led by former Police Commissioner Ken Lay, has already begun its work in meetings with stakeholders and reviewing the evidence and the data to report back to the government by the end of this year. We've also invested in naloxone programs and will soon be introducing legislation to Parliament making this life-saving medicine even more accessible, to make sure that people using opioids have the tools they need to stay alive and to stay safe. And in February, the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system will be handing down its final report, and we will be implementing every single recommendation. No doubt addressing the complex relationship between mental ill health and alcohol and other drug issues. We know many people in our community are struggling due to physical distancing and the isolation requirements. Challenges that are intensified for people who use drugs as they seek to manage their drug issue alongside the loneliness, fear and anxiety that COVID-19 can cause. There has never been a better time to come together to bring about bold and transformative change in this space. I'd like to recognise the leading role Victorians have played in the Overdose Awareness Day since its inception, starting with Sally Finn from the Salvos in St Kilda in 2001, now with the Pennington Institute as a worldwide convener. It's remarkable that such a global effort is being driven from Victoria. I thank them for their leadership. I would also like to thank the many drug and alcohol services that have been working hard to continue to provide their services in this new environment. You remain a vital health service during this period, and your flexibility and adaptiveness to get the best outcomes for clients is very much appreciated. Just as we have come together digitally today, I hope Victorians continue to reach out to each other in every way possible in the weeks and months ahead to get this job done. Thank you.
Hello everyone. You know, it's International Overdose Awareness Day, and I know that this is in such uncertain times, so I'm going to try not to mention COVID. I'm going to try and just reflect and remember about the friends, the families, the people I've met who have lost someone to an overdose. And I think about my friend Nigel. When he died of an overdose, and this was a long time ago, but when he died, his family couldn't speak about it. They couldn't say that he had died of an overdose. And that was probably 20 years ago, maybe more. But it hasn't changed. The stigma around drug use, the stigma around overdose is actually what's holding us back. The fact that if you want to give up cigarettes, if you want to have a dry July, everyone celebrates and congratulates. If you want to give up heroin, who are you going to tell? Because you can't. And the families that are trying to help their loved ones in this time, it's so difficult, and it's still so difficult, and it's wrong. You know, like overdoses, there's more people who die from an overdose than die from a road toll. But you know what? I've spoken to a number of families who, rather than say that their loved one died from an overdose, they say they died in a car accident, because that is acceptable. Yet, these days, more people die from overdoses than from the road toll. And we have to change that. And we know, look, I think the figures are around 6 for every 100,000 people die from an overdose. But when you think of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, that's 19 per 100,000. That's triple. And I hope that 2020 might be the year that we see changes. I mean, it's fantastic. Today we're going to see buildings light up. We're going to see Flinders Station light up, Amy Park, the Telstra Tower in Canberra. We're going to see buildings around the world light up to recognise the deaths to overdose. But what we need to see is changes in laws. Like, can we stop criminalising people for using drugs or for using certain drugs? I mean, Portugal did it like 20 years ago. And guess what? 4 people died from an overdose in Portugal in the last reported year. So we need to change these laws, and that will help us address stigma. And so I am calling on everyone, please remember your loved ones. Look after yourself. Reflect on the fact that people who use drugs use them for a whole bunch of reasons. It does not mean that they were bad. It does not mean that you did not love them enough, because you did. But the system that we deal with today makes that so hard. So on today, International Overdose Awareness Day, my heart goes out to everyone who has lost someone, everyone who is remembering someone today. But let's not stop fighting for a change. Let's not stop fighting to look at drugs from a different perspective, from look at drugs that is not a criminal. That person was someone who was loved. And I hope that 2020 is the year that things change in Australia.
Hi, I'm Greens MP Tim Reid, and I've just been reading through the Overdose Day website and reading the messages left from people who've lost someone to drug overdose, and it's really sad reading them. In fact, it's painful, particularly when you think that most of these could have been prevented. The way we manage illegal drugs right now in Victoria is prohibition. The problem with prohibition is that it feeds into the stigma and the judgment that's so damaging for people who are affected by drugs. It drives people away from help rather than towards help. Prohibition uses the risk that something bad might happen as a kind of deterrence. Instead, we need to be showing care. So, we've got some good news. For a couple of years now, we've had a medically supervised injecting room in Richmond, and we've just had an announcement of a new one opening up in the CBD sometime soon. But we need to do a lot more. These injecting rooms are closed to people who are under 18 or are pregnant or have court orders preventing them from using drugs. These people are just as much at risk of dying and have just as much right to resuscitation as anyone else. We need to open the injecting room doors to anyone who's got drugs and is going to use them. Other things we need to do are to make drug replacement therapies like methadone much more available. Doctors prescribing methadone are in short supply and their books are full, and so there's a lot of work that both the Victorian state government and the federal government can do to help here, as well as providing more beds and resources for treatment for people who are affected by drugs, particularly in country areas. As we tighten up on regulation of prescribed opiates, that will drive more people onto the illegal drug market, and more resources are going to be required to help those people. And now we're not having a lot of music festivals these days, but when they resume, the other area where we need to provide more compassion and less judgment is in pill testing. Thanks very much for listening, and thanks for joining World Overdose Day. But when they resume, the other area where we need to provide more compassion.
And a really big announcement. The common theme is, as Fiona Patton said, we need to change the laws. The laws are what's driving the stigma associated with these, with our reaction and care required. Dr. Tim Reid spoke about prohibition driving a stigma associated with risk, and when we need to wrap our arms around and care and provide support. And then the second safe injecting room being announced for the CBD. However, there are restrictions placed in that safe injecting room when every human being is entitled to resuscitation, should they so need, or the use of that facility. So it is positive that the politicians are acknowledging this and moving towards it. But as Fiona shared, more people die of overdose in the year than there are of car accidents. But there is still that stigma associated with addiction and overdose. So some bittersweet, I believe, in those announcements. Going to move on to our next message from Mrs. Adriana, and I apologise if I mispronounce your name, Adriana, but I believe it is Buchansee.
Yes.
Yep, great. My Italian's not too flash, but I'm glad I got that correct. Adriana is a mother of 2 and a grandmother of 3 granddaughters. Adriana is a social worker, a life coach, and a mental health clinician. She takes great pride in her conviction of drug law reform, with a belief that it only takes one person to make a change. Thank you very much, Adriana. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? First of all, I'd like to give my sincere condolences to Mick. That was very touching, and I understand his pain all too well. In 2012, on the 29th of January, the police came to my home at 8:30 a.m. to tell me that my son had died at a festival. Because I wasn't there, I thought to myself, it's impossible. I didn't identify him. Needless to say, that was the truth. It's interesting because Daniel would have been 42 this year, and he didn't start using any drug at all. In fact, he started smoking marijuana when he was 21. Didn't take an LSD tablet till he was 24, but he liked to party, and we had a very close relationship, and I knew that he used illicit drugs. We talked very openly many, many times about different things. And in all intents and purposes, I thought he was well educated. And when the police came to tell me that he had actually died of an overdose, I just could not believe it, because he was so careful. The night before he died, on a Saturday night, he called me from the festival where he was at, and he said, Mum, come and get me, because I've taken something I've never taken before. And he knew then that something had gone horribly wrong. I have since become a strong advocate for drug testing, field testing. In the last 4 months since the lockdown, I have reviewed my life, reviewed Daniel's, and just like Fiona, that, if this was a road toll, we would be up in arms and requesting for the government to be doing something about it. The stigma attached to people that die with a drug overdose is horrendous. I have never once said, in fact, no, I did once. I met a person, she asked me how Daniel died, and I said he died with a car accident. And I cried all the way home, and I vowed from that day that it's not how my son died, but how he lived that mattered. And I have never ever once steered away from that. He died of a drug overdose. It was accidental, and I know what it's like for all those parents who know that their children are never going to come back. So I say that it's time that we changed our laws, not only our laws, but I've actually changed my mind, and I really think that they should be regulated, they should be legal, because it's the only way that you're going to wipe out the criminal element from society. That's really about it that I have to say. It's been 8.5 years, and at times it's like yesterday. At times it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like a lifetime away. I look at the photos and I think, how could you be gone? And I think the worst thing that ever could happen to a parent is that you look at the death certificate, the birth certificate alongside each other, and you wonder, how do we get here in the first place? Thank you for having me. I'm humbled and honoured to talk about Daniel. I could just go on and on and on. My heart goes out to all the parents, anyone who's lost a person to a drug overdose. It's preventable and should never happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Absolutely similar message. Regulation, legalisation. 8.5 years ago, Daniel lost his life. And of course, at a festival, testing and then I guess these matters are causing stigma and perhaps not the action that is required. But thank you so much, Adriana. And it's really great that you're here supporting other families as well as they are moving through their challenges and with addictions and supporting their loved ones. So we've had now two families talk from their real life first-hand experiences. We've heard from the politicians, and now to the people that work on a ground level. Those allied services that work tirelessly to support where it matters, with counselling services, with rehabilitation, with support to families and support to those experiencing the addiction. It's a tremendous amount of work. So we're going to hear now from 3 pre-recorded messages. One's Sam Biondo, who's the CEO of the Alcohol and Other Drug Association. Mr. Sione Crawford is the CEO of the Harm Reduction in Victoria, and Dr. Nico Clark, the Medical Director of the Medical Supervised Injection Room in North Richmond. So we're going to hear from those 3 in consecutive blocks. So thank you, Nick, if we can load those pre-recorded messages.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're on, wherever we may be, and pay my respect to elders past and present. My name's Sam Biondo. I'm from the Victorian Alcohol and Drug Association. I'd like to thank the organisers of this event for inviting me here today to say a few words on International Overdose Awareness Day. This sort of event is really important because it allows us as a community to consider the impacts that drugs have not only on those individuals who are using them or been badly affected by them or passed away, but on families, friends, and all of us out there in the community. The sorts of issues we need to think about on days like today and the sorts of approaches relate to the sorts of approaches that we should be using to reduce overdose. It also focuses on issues that can help to promote access to treatment and provide support for friends and families, of course. Special days like today give us the opportunity to remember people in our lives, but also focus on important, pragmatic drug policies that reduce harm, reduce drug fatalities, keep loved ones alive. We need to put all the ideas we have on the table for consideration on how we do this. We should be considering the role that more supervised injecting facilities can have in our community, reducing deaths in our community. We should be considering the introduction of pill testing. We should be considering decriminalisation of drugs and the legislation and laws which create so much significant harm in this community, not only for the individuals affected, but the community as a whole, as more and more money and effort is put into law enforcement, incarceration, rather than the types of services which are required out there. We should be thinking about the establishment of heroin prescription programs, in other words, regulated supply, to get rid of the mobsters that are running the industry and put in place a regulated supply like they have in places like the Netherlands and in other places around the world, such as in Europe and in Canada. I think we also need to consider the availability of naloxone and making it more generally available across the community. And we need enhanced pharmacotherapy programs which reduce the financial burden on individuals who participate in these programs and make the access much easier. The simpler message is to support evidence-based programs, and essentially that should be our driving force across the sector. We need to reject policies that simply don't work, and certainly we know that prisons don't work. We know stigma impacts negatively on people. We know exclusion and turning a blind eye creates much significant and greater harm. And we should also take the opportunity to reconsider the harms caused by inappropriate criminal sanctions that do more harm than good. Let's consider the benefits of therapeutic justice programs which help rather than hinder rehabilitation. I'm sure the families and friends would want services that assist rather than punish, that don't criminalise and don't lead to unnecessary death. Let's also consider the opportunity to raise our concern about the damage brought by the stigma, which is so deeply rooted in society's response to drug users. Also take the time to consider the circumstances of Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse communities and their specific predicaments. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hi there, thanks a lot for having me here to the Yarra Drug and Health Forum International Overdose Awareness Day virtual get-together. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking from tonight, the Wurundjeri people. This is the Aboriginal land. It was never ceded. It always will be, always was Aboriginal land. You know, on Overdose Awareness Day this year, I believe that Yarra Drug and Health Forum is having a bit of focus on family, and you know, that put me in mind of my best friend Chris, who passed away a number of years ago now, and who I remember every Overdose Day. In fact, I remember him every day. But you know, in this context, he was part of my family. We were called brothers by our friends quite often, and that's not an unusual thing for people who use drugs to, you know, make of their friends their family. For loads of complex reasons, we are sometimes alienated from our families. But you know, when I went to Chris's funeral and saw the impact of his death on his blood family, I had my heart broken a second time. It was just such a traumatic and horrible experience for them, of course, as it was for me, and we became pretty close over that, despite the fact that at various times Chris had been very alienated from his family. You know, ultimately he and they loved each other. And, you know, as people who use drugs, we often have complex relationships with our families, as many, many people do. And sometimes I know that people I've spoken to have distanced themselves from their families because they want to protect them from the shame and stigma that's attached to having someone in your family who's an injecting drug user, and that, you know, that's just got to end at some point. You know, the stigma that attaches to injecting drug use is one of the things that underpins all these deaths that we're probably remembering and thinking about tonight. I know that my friend Chris was one of those people who would use very much alone, very much not tell people about the fact that he was using drugs because he was ashamed, ultimately. And I know that contributed to his death. And it's really time for us to get past this and accept and remember the people who use drugs are human beings. We have families. Our families care about us. Our families love us, and we love our families as well. And as sad as International Overdose Awareness Day is in many ways, let's try and use it as a reminder this year that we're all humans, and together we can all hopefully work together to first and foremost stop the war on drugs that underpins a lot of the stigma and discrimination that exists at the moment, both towards people who use drugs and inject drugs and our families. And so really, if I've got a message, it's this Overdose Day. It's that one. Also, that we all remember those that we love, that we've lost, not just on this day, but every day, forever. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this remembrance ceremony on International Overdose Awareness Day. Far too many people continue to die needlessly of opiate overdoses every year, when they can be prevented through a combination of measures, through supporting people to inject in safer ways, such as the medically supervised injecting room, reducing the stigma associated with drug use and addiction so that people don't need to hide their drug use and their issues, learning to recognise and respond to opiate overdose when we see it, including basic resuscitation skills, calling 000, provision of naloxone, and providing, as a society, providing the support to people when they reach out for help, including drug and alcohol services, mental health support, opiate agonist pharmacotherapy. At the medically supervised injecting room, we've safely managed thousands of overdoses in the last 2 years, many of them so severe that people were not breathing at all and would certainly have been fatal. We've provided hundreds of people with the skills to manage opiate overdoses and provided them with naloxone, and also provided hundreds of people with treatment for drug dependence, including pharmacotherapy, including such as the new injectable opiate pharmacotherapy, which many people have claimed has kind of literally been a life changer for them. As a result of these measures, we've seen a dramatic reduction in severe overdoses requiring naloxone in the area around the injecting room, borne out in the ambulance overdose dataset, showing that it's possible to reduce overdoses. I'd like to think that through our efforts, we're also showing that it's possible to have a more humane response to people with drug issues. And we can show that not only can we reduce the burden for individuals and families, but it's also a more effective response and reduce the burden of opiate overdose so that more people will live through their addictions and more families will remain united with the people they love.
Thank you very much. There are, again, some really important points. I have to share, when Sam Biondo was talking, that I'm an assistant principal, and as part of the training, part of student learning and brain development, it was we try our best to instill resilience, and what we try to teach is a growth mindset. You can't do something yet, about brain development. And one of the strategies we support our teachers with is to have our kids CAF ideas, consider all factors. Now, when Sam spoke about we need to put all the ideas on a table and consider all factors, it took me back to what we are telling our kids that we need to do as an effective strategy to work through any issue, to have a growth mindset, and it just astounds me that we haven't quite got to consider all factors, unbiased, unrestricted, but to be able to do that. Mr. Crawford spoke about then, let's stop the war on drugs. I mean, wars are wars. They're very narrow in thinking. Let's get to care and to always remember those that we have lost, not today, but every day. And thank you to Nico Clark as well with your messages. So some really important messages coming out there about programs, but consider all factors is just something that resonated with me. I'm going to hand over now to my incredible sister, Sheree Short. As I mentioned earlier, I lost my nephew and Sheree's son to a drug overdose, and I'm going to hand over to Sheree now, and then I'll introduce our next family message after Sheree. Thank you, Sheree, and thank you, Nick.
Good evening, everybody. Firstly, my heartfelt condolences go out to Mick and Adriana. I'm so sorry that you also have to experience this immense pain. My name is Sheree Short, and for the past 5 years, I have actively supported International Overdose Awareness Day in the community. Tragically, we lost our beautiful son to the preventable death that is overdose. And like most of Australia's drug-related deaths, Aaron's death was accidental. he will be forever 26 years young. Only 10 months later, we then lost his friend Sam, another beautiful and gentle soul whose life represented more than just addiction. It's actually still frightening and foreign to go from a family who are trying to hide addiction behind fear, guilt, and shame because of stigma. Over the years, I've received comments that are quite disturbing. It's baffling to think that any decent human being could wish death upon another. In all fairness, I suppose you can't truly know what you haven't experienced. Like anything, you don't know until you do know. And all that I ask is that you put yourself in the shoes of others before making judgment, because if this happened to our son, it can happen to anyone. It's just so presumptuous for people to think we didn't raise our child with morals and values, and that we ourselves are addicts, scumbags that live on the scourge of society. I mean, they don't know how we supported Aaron. And if given a chance, they don't know that we would have swapped our lives for his. So today I no longer feel I have the right to hide behind this stigma, because if telling our story helps to make a difference in the lives of others and change the course for other families, then I'm honouring the promise to our beautiful son. Aaron was not without the best loving intentions and protective factors in place, and still we were not immune. Aaron's life represented so much more than addiction, and those who knew him knew this. Deep blue smiling eyes, he was so kind and loving. In the short time he was here, he warmed so many hearts. He was our son and a big brother to Ali. Extremely intelligent, I see his building designs locally, as he was a draftsman by trade. His life experience had him change careers, and he went off to study in the IOAD sector, which I've since had the privilege of finishing the course for him. He was always giving to and helping others, and it's warming to know that in his life, he got to experience true love. He became a loving partner with plans to marry and have a family. So our hearts break not only for the loss of Aaron, but for his and our future generations that were yet to come. Aaron's story has a common theme, his addiction starting with pain medication. He was nearly 18 when an accident requiring surgery saw endone introduced into his life. One prescription and an addiction was born. But as parents, we would be able to turn this around and fix it all up. We were his parents, right? So why couldn't we get this under control quickly? And there lies the myth, like Mick said. Addiction cannot be cleaned up quickly. So we felt immense failure as parents and became a family who were trying to hide. We hid behind stigma. The stigma actually profoundly hindered Aaron's ability to live a meaningful life, and the stigma was a barrier to us seeking support. So parents already experience a high level of guilt, remorse, and self-blame. So stigma reduces the prospect of positive outcomes. Our experience of stigma came from different places in the community, even coming from some health professionals. Sadly, to this day, I still feel burdened by it, as there is also a stigma around a drug-related death. The fear through Aaron's addiction wreaked havoc on our lives, affecting our minds and bodies. Our relationships were strained. We isolated from family and friends, not telling a soul until perhaps years down the track. And even then, it was only a couple of family members who knew. We were so desperate for a service to take our child, have him return to us shiny and all new and normal, put him back on track again. We couldn't accept this was happening. You only want for your child to lead a meaningful life, and this couldn't be written into his story. We were so naive about services being accessible. We were like, what do you mean? We have to wait 8 weeks? Our child is sick. He's at risk of dying. We desperately need help. So the next 8 years would see Aaron in and out of detoxes countless times and for long stays at rehabs. The first being enforced by us, and then the many times thereafter were of his own accord. Looking back, I shake my head and I wonder how he did it. Endless times he booked himself into detoxes, rehabs, trauma counselling, I can only imagine how much courage and strength it took to fight his addiction, not to mention the determination it required to navigate systems and services, and in hindsight, to experience all their limitations. My son was far from weak. He was a true warrior. In fact, in the face of adversity, he fought like hell. I have massive regrets around how we handled Aaron's addiction. It was just overwhelming fear that would sometimes see us unleash our frustrations on him. You just need to stop. Why can't you just try harder? We would lay guilt trips on him and express how much it was affecting our lives. Christ, I could only imagine the effect on him would have been amplified. We bear a heavy sadness and huge regrets around our response. But again, it was only our deep love translating as fear. Bittersweet now, as we're since armed with education. And with what I know now, I would have handled our experience differently. In saying that, I express to families, please, there is no right or wrong. However, there can sometimes be different ways. I'm a strong advocate for family services and support, and firmly believe there are more positive outcomes when you include families and loved ones in a person's recovery. So finally, Aaron's perseverance eventually paid off, giving him a reprieve of over a year in recovery. And with the world at his feet, we watched in awe as his life became richer. He was able to reach out to others in need, and his healing had begun. So our guard was let down and our lives again once become meaningful. At this stage, never in a million years did we expect the real nightmare that was yet to come. The nightmare that made our experiences feel like a walk in the park. International Overdose Awareness Day is not about delivering an academic exercise. I live with a hope that other families don't experience the same pain and suffering. The pain of the experiences of the families who you heard tonight. They're just not stories to be told every International Overdose Awareness Day. In honour of our loved ones lost, let's continue this conversation beyond today. We need communities being willing to educate and raise awareness in order to break down the stigma. We need to unite to make these changes, to protect our future generations. Families need not lose loved ones to the preventable tragedy that is overdose. On behalf of our families like ours, thank you for your willingness to listen. Sometimes it's so powerful just listening. Together we have the power to influence change in mindsets, change in systems, and change in policies for a more humane approach to this real health issue. Thank you for listening tonight.
Thanks, Sheree. Yeah, I'll move on to the next. A bit difficult to synthesize that message there. Good job, sis. Wish I could come over and give you a cuddle right now too. A family message now. We have Miss Debbie Warner. Debbie is the co-founder of APOD Family Support, an organisation that supports family and friends of people with drug and alcohol issues. She's a family worker in the early psychosis program at the Alfred Hospital as well, and an advocate on drug law reform. And thank you, Debbie, for all the work that you've done in the lead up to this as well. Over to you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, my heart certainly goes out to Adriana and Adriana and Sheree, and I just can't even imagine how difficult it is to lose like Leah, Daniel, and Aaron. You know, just they had their lives ahead of them. Amazing young people coming from amazing families. I'm in a different position because my family member, my son, is still alive. Going back a little bit, he was achieving all his goals. He was enjoying his life. He had great friends and family, loved the outdoors, traveling, was a sports specialist teacher. But when he was 19, he went through a very traumatic event and he's struggled with his mental health and addiction ever since. So that's now 8 years ago. So he's overdosed many times. So on 4 occasions that I know of, one time it was I found him at home unresponsive and had to perform CPR with the support of the 000 operator until the ambulance arrived. And we've got like amazing support. Another time that I know is that a friend of his had to actually had naloxone and kept him alive with naloxone until the ambulance arrived. So yeah, we're really blessed because we've still got our son with us. He's going through a tough time in his life. He's very flat with his mental health. He finds it very difficult to find his purpose in life. He's 27 now, and what I know from working with families and facilitating support groups with APOD family support is that the most important thing I can do with my son is to make sure that I'm as kind and as compassionate with him, because his issues are very complex and so complex, and so far more complex than I would ever understand. And so what I know is that the more kind and compassionate I am towards him, the more I see him being able to have a little bit more self-worth. He's always, struggled with, since he's been using drugs, he struggles around the shame and stigma around drug use. And as his drug use has gone on, he's ended up with a lot more complex issues, medical complex issues. And what I do notice is that when he goes in to get medical help, his help is always a lot more around his medical issues. They're always taken very seriously and dealt with very quickly. But around anything to do with mental health or addiction, it's really a completely different story. He's sent around in circles. When he's reaching out for help, he's been on the waiting list he wanted to go into a specific treatment centre, and he's been on that waiting list now for 1 year, and he got his first phone call the other day from the intake team. So 1 year, that's like, that just wouldn't happen. He hurt his ankle, but he was helped straight away. So in the support groups that I facilitate, we have many families that lose their family members to overdose. And it's recently, we had a young man who lost his life. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had young children, beautiful mum and dad, great siblings. He was on his way home from work, and he decided to stop and injected in a toilet on his way home, and he was on his own and he overdosed. So again, it's so tragic that this family and his children have lost their dad. And he was just such a great person, and that was that technically is a preventable death, because if there had been a safe injecting room in his area, he would have gone and used it for sure, because it was something that he used to talk about, that he liked to use drugs, but there was also the ramifications of him using, in that he was putting himself in a risky situation because there weren't safe injecting rooms around. And also his shame and stigma around his drug use was always an issue, and that's what Matthew talks about, that he likes to use drugs, that it's something that he struggles with, whether to or not to, and that's where the complexity of it all comes in. But the more that we rally around, the more support he has around him, the more chance he has, the more hope he has for his future and for him being able to find his purpose in life. I've got one family member who couldn't speak tonight, but she asked me if I would read this out. She lost one of her sons. So we are the proud parents of fraternal twin boys. Trent has just had his 38th birthday. Jay passed away 13 years ago, 1 week and 1 day after their 25th birthday. Birthdays are hard. We find it difficult because Trent does not want to celebrate his birthday, but he should, as it is his birthday. For a few years after Jay passed, we could not talk about Jay on their birthday as it was too upsetting for Trent. In my lifetime, society has grown to talk openly about divorce, being gay, being a victim of domestic violence, or suffering from a mental illness. Yet society struggles with talking about drug use. We need to talk more about drug use. When Jay first passed away, I could not tell people what Jay died of. Now I tell the truth. I don't care if they judge because they don't know our son. I also tell them that Jay became an electrician and worked with his dad, and that they ran the communication cabling for the control centre for the Sydney, New Year's Eve fireworks. I now think of these fireworks as Jay's gift to Sydney. Two friends that had both lost children were at Jay's funeral. One had lost a 13-year-old son and the other had lost a 9-year-old daughter who was in Trent and Jay's class at school. The reason for our child passing away is not important. We are all parents or family members grieving the loss of someone we love. Not one day in the last 13 years has gone by without me talking to Jay. Jay was more than a drug user. He's our son and Trent's brother. That was from Robin, and I think, you know, when I think of the importance of changing drug laws, it's the laws around drugs. It's just so important that it's the professionals, the people that know what to do around the laws that help make the changes. The professionals in the IOAD services. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So we've heard from Mick in relation to Leah. We've heard from Daniel and Adriana, from Daniel, Sheree, Aaron. We've heard from Robin and Jay. And we've heard from the collective politicians. We've heard from allied services, the CEOs. And it is quite clear that stigma is a blocker to working on a care approach, on an individualised approach to dealing with addiction and the complexities involved. And so with that, we find ourselves in 2020, when I spoke last year, in a similar position, perhaps one more safe injecting room announced in the CBD than we did in 2019. So I hope the baby steps improve to leaps and bounds for the future. It needs to be a care approach, and obviously law reform is where it does need to begin. So that brings us to an end now. On behalf of everybody that's involved in organising this year's International Overdose Awareness event, we'd like to warmly thank and acknowledge these following people for this broadcast. Firstly, you've heard me refer to we call him Mr. Techno. He's an amazing operator, to Mr. Nick Wallace for making it possible for us to present online the event by providing his wonderful tech support and assistance. Thank you so gratefully, Nick. You didn't want me to mention his name, but I can't, because in the meetings leading up to this, to Peter from the Yarra Drug and Health Forum for supporting this event and bringing it together. I mean, Peter, your research, the collective, the lobbying of politicians, and you didn't want me to mention your name. Well, that was never going to happen. So thank you so much, Peter, and to all the families. I think we appreciate the work you've done behind the scenes. To Debbie, for the Zooms in driving around the car and taking your dogs for walks and organising all the meetings in the lead up. We appreciate all your support from APOD family support. That's APOD family support. To all our organisational partners and supporters, we thank you. And most importantly, or not most importantly, but just as importantly, a very warm thank you to the calibre of the supportive speakers, to the families that found strength to come and speak and share your support to other families through your stories and through the work ahead of you and what we can do together. Thank you very much. That brings us to an end for the International Overdose Awareness Day. That brings us to an end of this, I guess, gathering and coming together, but it does not. It is just the beginning still. As I shared in 2019, some messages are the same and some messages need to be acted on. We will be back, and we need to continue to remember every single day, as we've heard, and we need to continue to work in this space. So to everybody, thank you very much. I wish you a safe arms wrapped around evening, and look after yourselves, look after each other, and let's stay together, support each other, and be there. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Bye.